Hello and welcome to Being Naked. My name is Venus Castleberg, your host, and I am really actually very incredibly grateful and excited to have Mr. Christopher Hughes here today. Welcome, Christopher.
Thanks for having me, Venus.
Yeah. And I can't believe I'm going to cry, but I wanted to let you know that who you are in the world is truly a gift.
Thank you. I feel the same way about you. And it's funny because I don't think you and I have had many conversations together or, interacted here or there at class, but it's amazing to know that someone is out there being who they are and that is such a valuable contribution. So thank you for the acknowledgement. Yeah. I didn't expect to cry and it's only 7 a.m.
Well, I have had the honor of being in some classes with you and just heard you talk, and your kindness and your generosity of spirit is just such an inspiration. So thank you.
Thank you. Some of the work we do as facilitators or as people just wanting a better world to live in, you go out there and you do shows like you do here, or you teach, or facilitate classes rather, and you don't necessarily see what impact you're having or what change you're being in people's lives. Yeah. You just are out there being what the energy says will create a difference or might inspire people. And yeah, it's wonderful when you find out that you are actually moving people to choose something else. Mm-hmm. And as the title of your show, Being Naked, that's so valuable to me. The thing that I really would like for the world and that I would like to be able to have for myself and invite others to is a true sense of the courage that vulnerability requires. Mm. We talk about, or we've all heard the story. Sorry, my computer's dinging and binging this morning. We talk about, Lady Godiva. Remember the story about her who went through the town on the back of a horse naked, and everyone thought it was so scandalous, but you could really reframe that story and look at it from another angle. Not that she was being totally that she was flaunting something, but actually that she was willing to go without a barrier and be seen.
Right. Would you be willing to tell us that story so that people maybe don't know?
I don't actually remember the whole story, but there's just this legend. I think it was in France, but the name Godiva makes me think actually Italy. And it was about the shock and scandal of this woman who rode through town on the back of a horse, naked, with only her long tresses of hair to cover herself. And the way the story is told from my memory is that she was going against morality, and it was flying in the face of what the church said was proper.
Right.
And that's how that story has been framed. But it takes courage to be willing to be seen, to show up in the world without a filter and without a barrier and without a mask or a costume, just you.
Right.
And with bodies especially, we've got so many messages in the media trying to tell us what we need to fix about our body, rather than how to enjoy it, how to celebrate it, and the gift that it actually is when you allow people to see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and you actually facilitate a class called Right Voice for You, and I could you talk to that a little bit, because I think that that's something that you help show people, right? Is how to be themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the specialty classes in Access Consciousness, and it's a class about, well, let me talk a little bit about what people think it's about, because a lot of people think Right Voice for You is a class sort of like Toastmasters, or a place where you're going to learn a level of self-confidence by learning some techniques and skills so that you stand better, speak better, like, but what I have taken it to and what I invite people to with it is not to try and learn a technique.
Mm.
Technique is like the paint by numbers, like do this and then do this and then do this and you'll get the result. It's not about that. It's show up just as you and have no idea how you're going to do it, but show up as the rawness of you and let people in and see that. Like there's these things in Access Consciousness that we teach in the foundation manual called the 5 elements of intimacy. And that's honor, allowance, gratitude, vulnerability, and trust. And that's where I usually start most classes with, is going through those 5 elements. Because if you really want to be a voice in the world and have you and not shy away, those are the things that you need to be willing to be with you first. It's not about creating an intimate relationship with everyone around you. Yeah, that would be great, but you actually need to have all those things with yourself. And what's showing up for people is when they start to have this vulnerability and gratitude and allowance for themselves, they're not so concerned about what other people are going to think. Right. And when you're not worried about what people think, you can go out on a broadcast like we're on now and show up as you, as opposed to this like persona that you've designed to put on to broadcast so that people see, like have you seen that with people who, when they, as soon as the camera turns on, they stop being them and you're like, who are you?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember once I filmed in, I used to live in South Korea, and I filmed a television program. We filmed a pilot for it. It was kind of a weird idea for a show, but the idea was like Survivor, but in a Zen monastery. So they had all these Westerners trying to live as Zen monks and to see who could do it, like getting up at 4 a.m. to do 1,000 bows and say these sutras and do these mantras and do this meditation. And it's a pretty rigorous life. But every time the camera turned on, the people, the contestants, stopped being themselves, which is funny, reality TV, and no one's being real.
Right.
The only people that didn't have a point of view, but the cameras being there or being on, was these Zen monks. They didn't care. And I learned so much from them, watching them in this program, because it didn't affect who they were and how they showed up.
Wow. So can we talk about you a little bit? Like, was vulnerability something that was easy for you?
Yes, and vulnerability is something that you have to choose every day. Like, from the way I see things is, we are infinite beings, right? And as an infinite being, we have our body here, and then your being is infinite, and my being is infinite. And if they're infinite, how much do you and I overlap?
Right. All of it.
And yeah, and if they're infinite as well, there will always be more. We're never going to reach the end of our being. So things like vulnerability and allowance are something that you have to choose greater degrees of and a greater depth of every day and every moment, because you're never going to arrive at a destination and go, I now receive infinitely.
Right.
Receiving infinitely is part of who you be as a being. It's the truth of you, but you're never, it's, if you think you've got it, you're in a conclusion, you know? So vulnerability, I would say that it's sometimes uncomfortable. And like, because you asked if it's easy, some days easier than others. Like being vulnerable, what does that mean? It means having a look at things about yourself and being willing to receive them without a point of view. So, you know, if you've ever had an interaction with a partner or a friend or a colleague and a side of you came out that you weren't proud of,
Mhm.
it takes vulnerability to look at that and go, okay, this is what I chose. If it wasn't wrong, what part of me is this that I could have a look at or that I could be willing to receive? And if I was, I could have another choice. Because it's when you ignore these things that you don't have choice.
Right.
Sorry, does that answer your question, or is that like,
Yeah,
ooh.
that's great. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I'm just wondering, like if you could have everybody here get one thing about vulnerability, what would you like them to get?
What I'd like them to get about vulnerability is that it's not weakness.
Mm,
And it's actually the doorway to having a bigger life. And having a bigger life is not about money and cars and houses and private jets. A bigger life is, you know, when we talked about that infinite beingness, a bigger life is about stepping into more of that and claiming more of your awareness.
mm,
A bigger life comes from awareness of possibilities, not from more money.
mm.
Vulnerability opens the door to that by being a level of receiving. That's what I'd like people to get about it.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Would you say a little bit more about opening to a level of receiving?
Yeah. So the way that Gary Douglas describes vulnerability, and it's in the Access Consciousness Foundation manual. If anyone out there hasn't done the class, I highly recommend it. When I first took the foundation class, it changed every part of my life. I remember lying on the sofa after the class and looking at the ceiling and going, "Oh, I feel different on a cellular level. Like every being feels like it had a detox and a cleanse." And it was judgment washed out. And so opening the doors to receiving, and what Gary Douglas says vulnerability is being like an open wound where every breath of wind past that part of your body is amplified and intensified, and you feel it with such a vivid that it's just like alive. Every feeling, that every breath of wind that passes by you, you receive it with intensity. And so when you're willing to be vulnerable with you and have all of you or more of you without a point of view, you just experience the world in a different way.
Mm,
Everything becomes more vibrant, more rich, but also more intense.
mhm.
You know, I want to use the word sensitivity, but it's not exactly sensitivity. It's do you have any animals?
I have a dog. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And do you know what when your dog is willing to be like hyper aware of the world around him,
Mhm. Yeah.
that's a level of vulnerability and receiving. It's this like, supersonic hearing of everything
Mhm.
around,
Mhm.
receiving the information and the sensations of everything.
Right. Yeah, I learned that they can smell 100 smells at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah, just like yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine.
No wonder they have this like different appreciation of you because they know all your smells. So they
Right.
like you're coming up the driveway and they're like, there she is. That's mom.
Mhm.
I'm excited. Let's go see her.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that. And one of the things that I often do on this is like the way that we can tap, one of the ways, there's other ways I'm sure, but one of the ways that we can start to tap into vulnerability is to lower our deepest barriers and just take down all those walls and barriers and be willing to perceive and receive everything. So that was such a beautiful vision.
Yeah. I'd like to give another perspective on that too, though, because what if vulnerability as well as receiving the outside world? Because where we talked about being an infinite being and we go on infinitely. Sometimes we think of vulnerability as being quite internal and it's things coming in and receiving of things, and that is one side of it. But what if it was also receiving the expanse of us and we're really willing to be vulnerable, allowing more of us out into the world?
Oh, wow.
Like, like the one thing with Right Voice, I've noticed that people, I'd love them to get about vulnerability is it requires vulnerability to allow yourself to be seen, like Lady Godiva.
Right. Wow. So yeah, and it's not just a lot of people too think that vulnerability is, well, I have to show all my problems or my suffering and my pain. And what if it's actually more about showing your greatness? Um,
Yeah. Like so many people that, yeah, showing your greatness. Like people seem to think that if you were to let people see you and talk about yourself, that it would be self-interest and it would be like the Kardashian reality of I'm so great, look at me, aren't I important?
mhm,
But actually, each of us has lived experience and has stories to tell, and each of us are a gift.
mhm,
And when we let people know us and know things about us and things that we've seen, experiences, stories we've got to tell, it's actually it's such a gift.
mhm,
I had a lady on a class just 2 or 3 nights ago. She was practicing basically promoting her business. It was one of the things we were doing in Right Voice because sometimes that's something we have to do. And I asked her why she cared about what she was doing.
mm,
She started sharing this story. So now I'm going to cry about raising 4 autistic kids with an autistic husband and how nothing in her life had ever been about her. It had always been about taking care of everybody around her. And she was always last in her life. And knowing that about her gave me a totally new appreciation of who she was and what she had to offer the world.
mm,
The history we have and the things we've seen and done, our experiences are a gift. Like, do you remember growing up, we weren't so glued to our phones
right,
and we would have meals together and talk
mhm, right,
and share about our day and our experiences and what we'd done and who we'd seen and what occurred for us. And that was part of that vulnerability of intimacy of talking to one another. And it's something I think that we're losing, unfortunately. We don't, this idea of the dining room table where we sat down and talked. if you want to wind back history even further, it was sitting around a fire at night
Right.
and telling stories there as entertainment and ways to communicate. But now the fire that we sit around at night is technology.
Right. And we think that the texting is a conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
A lot of I have one of my other businesses here is the Antique Guild in Brisbane. And I have a lot of people that work for me. Predominantly, they're younger people in their 20s. And they are so reluctant and hesitant to phone people. I ask them to get in touch with someone, and they send them a text, or they send them a direct message on Instagram, or they'll send them an email, because that's very official. But I'm like, no, just pick up the phone and call them. But that's a level of intimacy and vulnerability that they find a little bit confronting. Putting yourself into someone's space by being willing to ring and go, hey, it's me. How you doing?
Yeah. Wow. And I wonder what would be possible if we would be willing to do that a little bit more. Everybody, just pick up the phone and call somebody. Well, Christopher, this has been such a beautiful conversation. And again, I am just so honored to have you, and thank you for all of your generosity of spirit. It's so grateful.
Thank you, Venus. I really appreciate it. I adore you.
I adore you too. And just in case somebody's curious, because I can't wait to take a Right Voice for You class with you. So there is one coming up the end of the month, and we'll put a link underneath the video and in the comments. So if you guys want to check it out, you can check it out there.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Have a great day.
Thanks, Venus. Bye.
Bye.